So you want to own a scrapyard. A truck backs onto the scale, the driver hops out with a load of bent rebar and old water heaters, the readout ticks up to 11,200 pounds, and you hand him cash off a fixed price sheet. He drives off happy. A forklift drops the load into a growing pile of steel that, by Friday, becomes a check from a mill 3 states away. Passive money, made off other people's junk. That's the fantasy, anyway. The price sheet you handed him was already stale by the time he read it. Scrap prices move like a stock ticker, sometimes twice in a day, and what you paid that morning has to survive processing, sorting, hauling, and selling weeks later, in a market that may have dropped 8% by then. The Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries, the trade group that tracks the domestic recycling economy, has found that ferrous scrap prices swung more than 30% within a single calendar year in 9 of the last 15 years. Most of the job isn't handling metal. It's guessing, correctly, every single day, what metal will be worth by the time you get around to selling it. Start at the bottom, since that's the cheapest way in. The industry calls it peddling. No yard, no scale house, just a truck and a trailer buying directly from contractors, demolition crews and homeowners, then reselling same day to a licensed processor. A decent flatbed or dump trailer runs $8,000 to $20,000 used. A portable platform scale, certified for legal for trade transactions, costs another $2,000 to $6,000. Add a truck, fuel, insurance, and a state scrap dealer license. Most states charge $100 to $1,000 a year plus a bond requirement, and you're operating for $25,000 to $50,000 total. No real estate, no employees, thin margins, and a lot of driving. The realistic middle tier is a small fixed yard. Industrial land in a light industrial zone, 1 to 3 acres, leases for $2,000 to $8,000 a month, or costs $300,000 to $1.5 million to buy outright, assuming it's already zoned for scrap processing, its own fight separately. A certified truck scale, the in-ground kind that weighs an 18-wheeler, costs $40,000 to $90,000 installed. A scale house with compliance software, required in most states, adds another $15,000 to $30,000. A wheeled excavator or material handler with a grapple runs $150,000 to $400,000 new, less used. A hydraulic baler for compacting light iron and cans costs $80,000 to $250,000. A torch cutting setup for breaking down structural steel is only a few $1,000s in equipment, and a lot more in insurance once you're cutting metal with an open flame next to a pile of it. A functioning small yard runs $600,000 to $1.5 million before you've bought a single pound of scrap. Full scale is a different business. A metal shredder, the industrial hammer mill that turns a car body into fist-sized chunks in about 90 seconds, costs $3 million to $8 million installed, before the downstream separation equipment. An eddy current separator, which uses a spinning magnetic rotor to fling non-ferrous metal like aluminum and copper away from the ferrous stream, adds $200,000 to $600,000. A shear for cutting heavy structural steel into mill-ready lengths runs $500,000 to $2 million. Environmental permitting for a shredder operation, covering stormwater runoff, air quality for shredder dust, and hazardous waste handling for the fluids drained out of every car that comes through, can take 1 to 3 years and run into 6 figures in engineering and legal fees before a permit is even issued. Full-scale entry, land included, runs $8 million to $25 million. Here's how the money actually moves. A scrapyard doesn't make its margin on the metal itself. It makes its margin on the spread between what it pays the person dropping metal off and what it can sell that same metal for once it's clean, sorted, and mill-ready. Say a yard buys bare, uncoated number 1 copper wire at $3.80 a pound off the walk-in scale one morning. That price is pegged loosely to a benchmark like the COMEX copper contract or the American Metal Market's daily bulletin, discounted so the yard has room to move. The yard sells that same wire, sorted and bundled into 40,000-pound truckloads, to a smelter or export broker at $4.05 a pound. 25 cents a pound is the whole business. Multiply it by a truckload and you get $10,000 gross on one load, and that $10,000 has to cover the scale operator's wage, the light bill, the insurance premium, the diesel in the forklift, and whatever the metal loses in weight or value while it sits waiting for a full truckload to accumulate. The obvious assumption is that a bigger spread is always better. Buy cheap, sell high. True, right up until the price moves against you while the metal is still sitting in your yard. Scrap doesn't sell the moment you buy it. It accumulates for days or weeks until there's enough volume to justify a truckload or a railcar, and the market keeps moving during that window whether you like it or not. A yard that bought copper at $3.80 assuming a $4.05 sale can watch the market drop to $3.70 before the truck even leaves the lot, and the spread that looked like profit becomes a loss on paper before a single pound moves. Operators who survive long-term hedge this the way commodity traders do, locking in forward contracts with a mill or smelter before they even set that morning's buy price, so the spread is protected the moment metal crosses the scale, not weeks later when it's finally sold. Permitting makes this worse. New scrapyard zoning approvals have gotten genuinely hard to get in most metro areas over the last 2 decades, as cities have tightened restrictions on outdoor storage, noise, and stormwater discharge near residential zones. Many jurisdictions have effectively stopped issuing new scrap processing permits within city limits at all, which pushes new entrants out to industrial parks far from the urban centers that generate the most volume. An existing, permitted yard in a good location, close to demolition sites, close to rail access for shipping, carries value well beyond its equipment, mostly because a competitor generally can't just build a new one next door. Nucor's acquisition of the David J. Joseph Company is a good illustration of how seriously the industry takes owning that spread at scale. David J. Joseph had operated as a scrap brokerage and recycling business since the 1880s, building relationships and yard locations across the country for well over a century before Nucor, one of the largest steel producers in the U.S., acquired it in 2007 for a reported $1.4 billion. Nucor wasn't buying scrap sitting in yards. It was buying guaranteed access to the raw material spread feeding its mills, plus decades of relationships with demolition contractors and industrial suppliers that a new entrant simply can't build quickly. Steel Dynamics' acquisition of OmniSource, done in stages between 2007 and 2013, follows the same logic. Mills keep buying scrap processors for the buy-side relationships and permitted locations that lock in a feedstock supply at a predictable spread. The equipment is almost beside the point. What separates a yard that survives from one that quietly closes after 3 years usually isn't the equipment either. It's inventory discipline. Top operators turn their non-ferrous inventory, the copper, brass, and aluminum, within days rather than weeks, because that's where the price volatility is sharpest and the holding risk highest. They post buy prices that update several times a day instead of once a week, protecting the spread instead of hoping the market holds still. They build direct relationships with demolition contractors and electricians who generate consistent volume, rather than living off walk-in traffic, because you can't plan a hedge or a forward sale off foot traffic you can't predict. And they spend real money on theft prevention and documentation. Catalytic converter theft has gotten bad enough that most states now require scrap dealers to photograph sellers' identification, hold payments for several days on certain commodities, and log serial numbers on some categories of metal before a transaction can complete. None of that shows up in a naive revenue projection. All of it shows up in a lawyer's invoice the first time a yard gets investigated for receiving stolen material without the right paperwork on file. 3 scenarios to make this concrete. First, a peddler operation. 1 truck, buying from contractors and reselling to a fixed yard the same day. You invest $40,000 total. You move roughly 20,000 pounds of mixed scrap a week, mostly ferrous with occasional non-ferrous mixed in, at an average spread of 4 cents a pound after fuel and your own time. That's $800 a week gross, roughly $41,000 a year, and since you're covering your own labor, you clear maybe $25,000 to $30,000 net for what's really a full-time job with a truck payment attached. Second, a mid-tier fixed yard. $900,000 invested in land, scale, and equipment. You process 400,000 pounds a week across ferrous and non-ferrous combined. Ferrous spread runs roughly $30 to $50 a ton after processing costs. Non-ferrous, thinner in volume but far richer in margin, adds another $8,000 to $15,000 a week when copper and aluminum prices are healthy. Gross revenue lands around $2.8 million a year. Costs, 2 scale operators, a yard crew of 4, insurance, lease, equipment maintenance, fuel, run roughly $1.9 million. Net profit before debt service comes to around $500,000 to $650,000 in a normal year, closer to $200,000 when metal prices are depressed and volume drops. Third, a full-scale shredder operation, $15 million invested, processing several thousand tons a week and feeding directly into forward contracts with regional mills. Revenue in a strong commodity year can clear $40 to $60 million. Net margin after debt service on that scale of equipment typically runs 8% to 14%, meaning $3 million to $8 million in a good year, closer to break even in a down cycle where ferrous prices have, as they did during the 2015 commodity downturn, when scrap steel prices fell by roughly half in 12 months. The operators who survived that cycle were the ones who hadn't leveraged the shredder purchase to the hilt, and who could absorb a full year of thin spreads without missing a loan payment. Picture the truck again, backed onto the scale, the driver watching the readout tick up while you hand him a number off the price sheet. He can't see that the number was set against a forward contract locked in that morning, against a permit that took 2 years and a stack of engineering reports to get, against a market that will move another 11 times before that same metal leaves your yard as someone else's raw material. You never really owned the steel. You owned the spread, for as long as you could hold it, until the number on the board changed again.